For 100,000 years, humans looked up. They watched birds fly over mountains, over oceans, over everything that stopped us. And for all that time, we could only dream. This is the story of how we stopped dreaming and started flying. Imagine you are standing in a field in North Carolina. The year is 1903. The wind is cold. The sand is wet. And two brothers, bicycle makers from Ohio, are about to attempt something that the smartest scientists in the world said was impossible. Their names were Orville and Wilbur Wright. But before we get to that December morning, we need to go back, much further back. Because the dream of human flight is not a modern story. It is an ancient obsession. Over 2,000 years ago, a Greek myth told the story of a boy named Icarus. His father, Daedalus, built wings made of feathers and wax so they could escape from a prison island. Daedalus warned his son, "Do not fly too close to the sun." But Icarus was young and excited and free. He flew higher and higher. The sun melted his wings. He fell into the sea. For thousands of years, that story was a warning. Flying is not for humans. The sky belongs to the birds. But not everyone listened. In the 1400s, in Italy, a man named Leonardo da Vinci looked at birds for years. He studied how their wings moved, how air pushed against feathers, how a body could stay lifted above the ground. He filled hundreds of pages with drawings, flying machines, gliders, a device that looked like a helicopter. He called it the aerial screw. Leonardo never built a working flying machine, but his drawings were extraordinary. He understood something important. Flight is not magic. It is physics. It is pressure and angles and the shape of a wing. He just didn't have the materials, or the engine, or the courage. Those would come later. In 1783, two French brothers, Joseph and Etienne Montgolfier, noticed something simple. When smoke rises, it carries things up with it. What if you trapped that hot air inside a large bag? On June 4, 1783, they stood in a public square in France and filled a giant cloth balloon with hot smoke from a fire below. The crowd watched, silent. Then the balloon rose. It went up over 40 meters. It stayed in the air for 10 minutes. The crowd screamed and cheered. Humans had never done anything like this before. Later that year, in November, two brave men climbed into a basket attached to a Montgolfier balloon and flew over Paris for 25 minutes. They were the first humans in history to truly leave the ground. Paris went wild. People wrote songs about it. Artists painted pictures of the balloon. It was on cups, plates, jewelry. France was obsessed. But here is the thing about balloons. You cannot steer them. You go where the wind takes you. You are a passenger of the sky, not a pilot. The real dream was controlled flight. To go where you want, to turn left, to go up, to come down safely, on purpose. That dream would take another 100 years. In the 1800s, a quiet English engineer named George Cayley spent decades thinking about wings. He experimented with kites. He designed a glider, a wingless aircraft with no engine that flies using air currents. In 1853, he built a glider large enough to carry a person. His coachman, the man who drove his horse and carriage, became the world's first airplane passenger. Against his will, some stories say. He flew across a small valley, landed hard, climbed out, and said to Sir George, "I was hired to drive, not to fly." George Cayley became known as the father of aviation. He understood the four forces that control all flight: lift, drag, thrust, and weight. Every airplane built after him used these same principles. But still, no engine, no controlled, powered flight. Then came the steam age. Engineers tried to build powered flying machines using steam engines. They were too heavy. They crashed. One man named Samuel Langley spent years and enormous amounts of U.S. government money on a steam-powered aircraft he called the aerodrome. In 1903, just days before the Wright Brothers' famous flight, his machine launched from a houseboat on the Potomac River and immediately crashed into the water. Newspapers laughed at him. One wrote, "Professor Langley has demonstrated that his flying machine will not fly." And then, 9 days later, 2 bicycle makers from Dayton, Ohio, changed the world forever. Orville and Wilbur Wright were not rich. They were not professors. They did not have government money. They had a small bicycle shop and a powerful curiosity. They had read everything about flight. They had studied Cayley's 4 forces. They had experimented with kites and gliders in their backyard. And they had designed something new, a system of wing warping that let the pilot control the aircraft left and right, like the way a bird tilts its wings. They also built their own engine, small, light, 12 horsepower. Not much by modern standards, but enough. On December 17, 1903, Orville lay face down on the lower wing of their small biplane, a machine called the Flyer. Wilbur held one wing steady. The engine started. The propellers turned. It moved forward along a wooden rail. It lifted. It flew. For 12 seconds, the Flyer moved through the cold North Carolina air. It traveled 37 meters, less than the wingspan of a modern Boeing 747. It was bumpy and difficult and almost crashed. But it flew, under power, under control, with a human being on board. They did it 3 more times that day. The longest flight lasted 59 seconds and covered 260 meters. No one was watching except 5 people, a few local men who had helped them move the aircraft. When Orville sent a telegram to their father that evening, the old man went out and told his neighbors. Most of them didn't understand what had happened. Some didn't believe him. The next day, some newspapers got the story wrong. One said the flight had lasted 3 miles and lasted 57 minutes. Total fiction. The real story was even more amazing. The Wright brothers kept working. By 1905, their 3rd aircraft, the Flyer 3, could fly for 38 minutes and cover 24 miles. It could circle. It could bank left and right. It was a real, controllable aircraft. But the world was slow to notice. They worked in a field near Dayton for years, flying almost every day, and almost nobody came to watch. Then came 1908. Wilbur Wright went to France to demonstrate the aircraft, and France, which had been claiming for years that its own inventors were ahead of the Americans, went completely silent. The crowds watched Wilbur fly. He banked, he circled, he controlled the machine with ease. It was nothing like anything anyone in Europe had built. A French aviator stood up after the demonstration, turned to the crowd and said, "We are beaten. We just don't exist." Overnight, the Wright brothers became the most famous men in the world, and then everyone wanted in. The next 20 years were wild, dangerous, and glorious. Pilots pushed the new machines further and further. In 1909, a Frenchman named Louis Blériot flew across the English Channel. 36 kilometers of open water. If the engine stopped, and engines stopped all the time in those days, he would fall into the sea. He made it in 37 minutes. Britain woke up the next day knowing something important. The Channel was no longer a wall. The world had become smaller overnight. Then came the First World War. The airplane, barely 10 years old, became a weapon. Pilots chased each other across the sky. They dropped bombs. They watched battlefields from above. In 1914, planes were flimsy toys made of wood and cloth. By 1918, they were powerful machines with machine guns and steel frames. War accelerated aviation by decades. After the war, pilots had no more battles to fight. So they raced. They set records. In 1919, two British pilots named John Alcock and Arthur Brown flew non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean, from Canada to Ireland, in a modified wartime bomber. They flew through clouds and fog. They nearly crashed twice, and they landed nose first in an Irish bog. But they made it. 16 hours and 28 minutes. The Atlantic crossed. Then, in 1927, a young, quiet American named Charles Lindbergh did something even more remarkable. He flew solo, alone, no co-pilot, no navigation help, from New York to Paris. 33.5 hours. He did not sleep. He had no radio contact for most of the journey. He navigated by stars and compass. When he landed at Le Bourget Airport near Paris at 10 p.m. on May 21st, 100,000 people were waiting. They had been there for hours. They broke through the fence and carried Lindbergh off the plane on their shoulders, cheering and crying. He became the most famous person alive almost overnight. He received 3.5 million letters and 100,000 telegrams. The world understood, finally. The airplane was not a toy. It was not a curiosity. It would change everything. And it did. In the 1930s, commercial airlines began operating. At first, flying was extremely expensive. Only the very rich could afford it. Planes were small and slow and loud. The ride was bumpy. Passengers got sick. There were no pressurized cabins, so flying high meant freezing cold and very thin air. But the industry improved fast. In 1936, the Douglas DC-3 changed everything. It was fast enough, large enough, and comfortable enough to make air travel practical. Airlines used it everywhere. It could carry 21 passengers and fly at 333 kilometers per hour. For the first time, flying coast to coast across America in a single day was possible. Then came the Second World War. Once again, planes transformed. Jet engines, developed secretly in both Britain and Germany during the war, would soon replace propellers. By 1945, the German Messerschmitt Me-262
was flying at 870 kilometers per hour, faster than any propeller aircraft could dream of matching. On October 14, 1947, an American test pilot named Chuck Yeager climbed into a small experimental aircraft called the Bell X-1. It was carried up under a bomber, then released. Yeager fired the rocket engine. He accelerated through 1,000 kilometers per hour. The air around the plane began to shake and compress. Everyone said the sound barrier was a physical wall, that no aircraft could pass through it. Some engineers said the plane would shake apart. Then, for a moment, everything went quiet. Yeager had broken the sound barrier. He was flying faster than sound itself. The boom he created was heard across the California desert, and no one knew what it was. The sky had no more barriers. In 1952, the first commercial jet airliner, the de Havilland Comet, entered service in Britain. In 1958, the Boeing 707 launched and transformed international travel forever. Suddenly, a flight from London to New York took 7 hours instead of weeks by ship. In 1969, the Boeing 747 took its first flight, the jumbo jet. It could carry over 400 passengers. It made flying affordable for ordinary people. And in 1976, the Concorde began carrying passengers between London and New York in under 3.5 hours, flying at twice the speed of sound at an altitude where you could see the curvature of the Earth. From the Wright Brothers' 12 seconds to supersonic passenger jets in 73 years.
Today, there are over 100,000 flights in the air every single day. Every second, somewhere in the world, an aircraft is taking off or landing. Aviation connects every city, every country, every culture on Earth. It carries people to hospitals, delivers food to remote islands, reunites families separated by oceans. We do not think about it anymore. We complain about legroom. We grumble about the food. We sleep on overnight flights. We forgot that we are flying. But Orville Wright never forgot. He lived until 1948, long enough to see the jet age begin. He had been born before the automobile was common. He died as humanity was preparing to break the sound barrier. Near the end of his life, someone asked him how he felt about everything that came from that cold morning in North Carolina. He said that he and Wilbur had hoped that the airplane would bring peace, that if countries could trade and communicate freely, wars would stop. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "We dared to hope." The world did not become peaceful, but it did become, in some ways, smaller and more connected. And it started in a field with two brothers, a 12-horsepower engine, and a 12-second dream.